Morning, Team Alabama. We are ready to do another day of Anne Frank. We are ready for page 503. Please find it on your Chromebook now and read along with me. You should have quite a few facts already. We need 50 facts for Anne Frank and 10 vocab and 10 questions also. So let's go ahead and be ready on page 503 and add to our facts today at least 5. Starting at the top of page 503, Anne, and have them walk all over me the way they do her. No thanks. Because her mom had just said, try to be like Margot. So a good fact would be that Anne and Mom don't seem to always get along or see eye to eye. And Margot is kind of the one that always seems to be perfect in Anne's eyes and maybe even in Mom's eyes. So there's this kind of disagreement or rub between Mom and Anne. And Anne seems to get along much better with her dad. Okay. Mrs. Frank says, I'm not afraid that anyone is going to walk all over you, Anne. I'm afraid for other people that you'll walk on them. I don't know what happens to you, Anne. You are wild, self-willed. If I had ever talked to my mother as you talk to me, things have changed. People aren't like that anymore. Yes, Mother. No, Mother. Anything you say, Mother. I've got to fight things out for myself, make something of myself. It isn't necessary to fight to do it. Margot doesn't fight, and isn't she? Anne, violently rebellious. Margot, Margot, Margot. That's all I hear from everyone. How wonderful Margot is. Why aren't you like Margot? Margot, protesting. Oh, come on, Anne. Don't be so. Anne, paying no attention. Everything she does is right, and everything I do is wrong. I'm the goat around here. You're all against me, and you worst of all. She rushes off into her room and throws herself down on the settee. The settee is a small couch. Look on page 503, Settee. Stifling her sobs or trying to muffle them, trying to be quiet, Mrs. Frank sighs and starts towards the stove. Mrs. Frank to Margot, let's put the soup on the stove. If there's anyone who cares to eat, Margot, will you take the bread out? Margot gets the bread from the cupboard. I don't know how we can go on living this way. I can't say a word to Anne. She flies at me. Margot, you know Anne. In half an hour she'll be out here laughing and joking. Mrs. Frank, and she makes a motion upwards, indicating the Van Dans. Remember the couple that lives with them, the Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan. I told your father it wouldn't work, but no. He had to ask them. He said he owed it to them. He said, well, he knows now that I was right. Those quarrels, this bickering. Okay, so that's another really good fact that we can add. The Van Daans bicker off and on all day long. They argue about everything. And she's very materialistic, very concerned about what she has and money. And she's the one that wore the fur coat into hiding. Like, who does that? Margot, with a warning look. Shh, shh. The buzzer for the door sounded. Mrs. Frank gasps, startled. Every time I hear that sound, my heart stops. Margot, starting for Peter's door. It's Meep. She knocks at the door. Father. Mr. Frank comes quickly from Peter's room. Thank you, Margot, as he goes down the steps to open the outer door. Has everyone his list? Margot, I'll get my books. Giving her mother a list. Here's your list. Margot goes into her in Anne's bedroom on the right, and Anne sits up, hiding her tears as Margot comes in. Meep's here. Margot picks up her books and goes back. Anne hurries over to the mirror, smoothing her hair. Mr. Van Daan coming down the stairs. Is it Meep? Yes, Father's gone down to let her in. At last, I'll have some cigarettes. Mrs. Frank to Mr. Van Daan. I can't tell you how unhappy I am about Mrs. Van Daan's coat. Anne should never have touched it. Mr. Van Daan, she'll be all right. Is there anything I can do? Don't worry. He turns to Meep, but it is not Meep who comes up the stairs. It is Mr. Kraler, followed by Mr. Frank. Their faces are grave, and Anne comes from the bedroom, and Peter comes from his room. Mr. Kraler, how are you, Mr. Kraler? This is a surprise. When Mr. Kraler comes, the sun begins to shine. Meep is coming. Not tonight. Kraler goes to Margot and Mrs. Frank and Anne, shaking hands with them. Mrs. Frank, wouldn't you like a cup of coffee, or better still, will you have supper with us? So Mrs. Frank's asking Mr. Kraler if he would like to eat with them. And remember, their food is very, very small. They have small amounts. They're given ration books. And those ration books are like coupons to exchange for food. And they have those illegally. And nobody knows that Meep and Mr. Kraler are bringing them food in the attic. Mr. Frank, Mr. Kraler has something to talk over with us. Something has happened, he says, which demands an immediate decision. Mrs. Frank, fearful, what is it? Mr. Kraler sits down on the couch, and as he talks, he takes bread, cabbages, milk from his briefcase, giving them to Margot and Anne to put away. So he hides the food when he brings the food to the Franks. So that's a great fact to add, that he brings the food to the Franks in his briefcase, and he has to do it in kind of a sneaky way. Mr. Kraler, usually when I come up here, I try to bring you some bit of good news. What's the use of telling you the bad news when there's nothing that you can do about it? But today something has happened. Dirk, Meep's Dirk, you know, came to me just now, and he tells me that he has a Jewish friend living near him, a dentist, and he says he's in trouble. He begged me, could I do anything for this man? Could I find him a hiding place? So I've come to you. I know it's a terrible thing to ask of you, living as you are, but would you take him in with you? Mr. Frank, of course we will. Mr. Kraler, rising, it'll be just a night or two until I find some other place. This happened so suddenly that I didn't know where to turn. Where is he? Downstairs in the office. Good, bring him up. His name is Dussel, Jan Dussel. Dussel? I think I know him. I'll get him. He goes quickly down the steps and out, and Mr. Frank suddenly becomes conscious of the others. Mr. Frank, forgive me. I spoke without consulting you, but I knew that you'd feel as I do. Mr. Van Daan, there's no reason for you to consult anyone. This is your place. You have a right to do exactly as you please. The only thing I feel, there's so little food as it is, and to take in another person. Peter turns away, ashamed of his father. Why is Peter ashamed of his father? That's a good question that you could ask in your notes. Why is Peter embarrassed by his dad? Why was Mr. Van Daan's first idea only about food? Okay, remember they describe Mr. Van Daan as portly. Portly means fat. Okay, so he's a large guy, and all he's worried about is taking in one more person is going to reduce the amount of food that everybody gets. Mr. Frank, we can stretch the food a little. It's only for a few days. You want to make a bet? Mr. Van Daan says. I think it's fine to have him, but Otto, where are you going to put him? Where? Peter, he can have my bed, but I can sleep on the floor. I wouldn't mind. That's good of you, Peter, but your room's too small, even for you. Anne, I have a much better idea. I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Margot can take Peter's room. And Peter can go into our room with Mr. Dussel. That's right, we could do that. No, Margot, you mustn't sleep in that room. Neither you nor Anne. Mushy has caught some rats in there. Peter's brave. He doesn't mind. Then how about this? I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Mr. Dussel can have my bed. No, no, no. Margot will come in here with us, and he can have her bed. It's the only way. Margot, bring your things in here. Help her, Anne. Margot hurries into her room and to get her things. Anne to Mother, why Margot? Why can't I come in here? Because it wouldn't be proper for Margot to sleep with a man, is what Mom's getting at, because Margot's older, and for her to share the same room with this Mr. Dussel. Please, Anne, don't argue, please. Anne starts slowly away. Mr. Frank to Anne, you don't mind sharing your room with Mr. Dussel, do you, Anne? So now Anne's being asked to share her room with Mr. Dussel. And Margot's going to go sleep with Mom and Dad. So there are a couple of good facts that you can add. Anne says, no, no, of course not. Mr. Frank, good. Anne goes off into her bedroom helping Margot, and Mr. Frank starts to search in the cupboard. Where's the cognac? And cognac is like an adult drink or an adult beverage. It's there, but Otto, I was saving it in case of illness. I think we can't find a better time to use it. Peter, will you get 5 glasses for me? Peter goes for the glasses, and Margot comes out of her bedroom carrying her possessions, which she hangs behind a curtain in the main room. Mr. Frank finds the cognac and pours it into the 5 glasses that Peter brings him. Mr. Van Daan stands looking on sourly, and Mrs. Van Daan comes downstairs and looks around at all the bustle. What's happening? What's going on? Mr. Van Daan, someone's moving in with us. Mrs. Van Daan, in here? You're joking. It's only for a night or two until Mr. Kraler finds him another place. Yeah. Mr. Van Daan's very negative. Yeah. Mr. Frank hurries over as Mr. Kraler and Mr. Dussel come up. Dussel is a man in his late 50s. Okay, that's a great fact that we can add a little bit more about these characters that come to live in the attic with them. So Mr. Dussel's a dentist. He's in his late 50s. He's meticulous. Like, everything about him is perfect. He's very clean. And finicky. He's particular. Okay, bewildered man. He wears a raincoat. He carries a briefcase stuffed full and a small medicine case. Come in, Mr. Dussel. This is Mr. Frank. Dussel, Mr. Otto Frank? Yes, let me take your things. He takes the hat and briefcase, but Dussel clings to his medicine case. This is my wife, Edith. Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan, their son Peter, and my daughters, Margot and Anne. Dussel shakes hands with everyone. Mr. Kraler, thank you, Mr. Frank. Thank you all, Mr. Dussel. I leave you in good hands. Oh, Dirk's coat. Dussel hurriedly takes off the raincoat, giving it to Mr. Kraler, and underneath is his white dentist jacket with a yellow Star of David on it. Dussel to Mr. Kraler. What can I say to thank you? Mrs. Frank to Dussel. Mr. Kraler and Meep, they're our lifeline. Without them, we wouldn't live. Okay, so that's a great fact. The Franks consider Mr. Kraler and Meep their lifeline. What does that mean? Like being a lifesaver to somebody? They always take care of them. They deliver the food. They deliver and they get things that they need. They consider them extremely important to them being able to live in the attic. Mr. Kraler, please, you make us seem very heroic. It isn't that at all. We simply don't like the Nazis. To Mr. Frank, who offers him a drink. No thanks. Then going on. We don't like their methods. We don't like... Mr. Frank smiling. I know. No one's going to tell us Dutchmen what to do with our Jews. Mr. Kraler to Dussel. Pay no attention to Mr. Frank. I'll be up tomorrow to see that they're treating you right. To Mr. Frank. Don't trouble to come down again. Peter will bolt the door after me, won't you, Peter? Yes, sir. Thank you, Peter. I'll do it. Good night. Good night. Mr. Kraler tells everyone good night. Good night, Mr. Kraler. We'll see you tomorrow. Mr. Kraler goes out with Mr. Frank. Mrs. Frank gives each of the grown-ups a glass of cognac. Please, Mr. Dussel, sit down. Mr. Dussel sinks into his chair, and Mrs. Frank gives him a glass of cognac. Dussel, I'm dreaming. I know it. I can't believe my eyes. Mr. Otto Frank here. To Mrs. Frank, you're not in Switzerland then. A woman told me. She said that she'd gone to your house. The door was open and everything was in disorder and dishes in the sink. And she said she found a piece of paper in the wastebasket with an address scribbled on it. An address in Zurich. She said that you must have escaped to Zurich. Father put that there purposely, just so people would think that very thing. And you have been here all the time? All the time, ever since July. Anne speaks to her father as he comes back. It worked, Pim. The address that you left. Mr. Dussel says that people believe that we escaped to Switzerland. Okay, so there's another good fact. Mr. Frank put an address to Switzerland in the trash, and people think that they escaped to Switzerland. And Anne calls her dad Pim. That's another good fact that you can add. Kind of like a, like some people may say dad or daddy or pops. She calls him Pim. Mr. Frank, I'm glad. And now let's have a little drink to welcome Mr. Dussel. Before they can drink, Mr. Dussel bolts his drink. Okay, so you're going to add bolts to your vocab. Bolts, he downs it. He chugs it. He takes it quickly. Mr. Frank smiles and raises his glass. To Mr. Dussel, welcome. We're very honored to have you with us. To Mr. Dussel, welcome. The Van Daans murmur a welcome. The grown-ups drink. Mrs. Van Daan, that was good. Mr. Van Daan, did Mr. Kraler warn you that you won't get much to eat here? You can imagine 3 ration books, among the 7 of us. So they have food for 3 people and 3 ration books, but they have 7 people living in the attic, but now he makes 8. So the food for 3 needs to be stretched for food for 8. Peter walks away humiliated by his dad. He's embarrassed that all his dad is thinking about is food. Outside, a street organ is heard dimly. Dussel rising. Mr. Van Daan, you don't realize what is happening outside, that you should warn me of a thing like that. You don't realize what's going on. As Mr. Van Daan starts his characteristic pacing, Dussel turns to speak to others. Right here in Amsterdam, every day, hundreds of Jews disappear. They surround, they block, and they search house by house. Children come home from school to find their parents gone. Hundreds are being deported. People that you and I know. The Hollensteins, the Wessels. Mrs. Frank in tears. Oh, no, no. Dussel, they get their call-up notice and come to the Jewish theater on such and such a day and hour and bring only what you can carry in a rucksack. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and they drag you from your home and they ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp. Okay, so the soldiers are coming around to the houses and taking people out of their houses. Kids are at school and they come home to no parents. Mrs. Frank, we don't know that things had gotten so much worse. Forgive me for speaking so. Anne coming to Dussel. Do you know the De Walls? What's become of them? Their daughter Jopie and I are in the same class. Jopie's my best friend. They're gone. Gone? With all the others. Oh no, not Jopie. She turns away in tears, and Mrs. Frank motions to Margot to comfort her, and Margot goes to Anne, putting her arms comfortingly around her. There were some people called Wagner. They live near us. Mr. Frank interrupting with a glance at Anne. I think we should put this off until later. We all have many questions that we want to ask, but I am sure that Mr. Dussel would like to get settled before supper. Okay, what do you think is the real reason why Mr. Frank doesn't want to keep talking about this? Is he worried that this discussion will upset Anne? I think maybe so. Thank you, I would. I brought very little with me. Mr. Frank, giving him his hat and briefcase. I'm sorry that we can't give you a room alone, but I hope you won't be too uncomfortable. We've had to make strict rules here, a schedule of hours. We'll tell you after supper, Anne. Would you like to take Mr. Dussel to his room? Anne, controlling her tears. If you'll come with me, Mr. Dussel, and she starts for her room. Dussel, shaking hands with each in turn. Forgive me if I haven't really expressed my gratitude to all of you. This has been such a shock to me. I'd always thought of myself as Dutch. I was born in Holland. My father was born in Holland, and my grandfather. And now, after all these years, he breaks off, if you'll excuse me. Dussel gives a little bow and hurries off after Anne, and Mr. Frank and the others are subdued. Subdued is a great word to add to your vocab, meaning kind of quiet, and they're kind of in shock. Okay, we're going to stop there for today, and that's page 507. You should have been able to add easily 5 to 10 facts, if not, and a couple of vocabulary words. If not, go back and add those right now. Have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.